We will plan to share this video and the written FAQs to the website, and we'll share the link to that by email. Some of you may be new to RISE, so please allow me to give just a brief overview of our work. RISE was launched in 2017, and we are an independent nonprofit foundation created to end the overdose epidemic. We're made up of consistently growing group of providers, payers, unions, advocates, and people with lived experience who are really equity-minded, entrepreneurial, collaborative, and dogged in our pursuit of our mission. We share and convey really a sense of urgency that addressing the overdose crisis cannot wait. One of our strategies to end the opioid crisis is to serve as a neutral convener. We convene voices for action and align thinking to approaches for substance use disorder and services to disrupt the status quo and make social change. We appreciate your interest in the RFI, and we believe RISE is uniquely positioned to initiate a reconciliation process to bring lasting positive changes at the intersection of Massachusetts Avenue and Milnea Cass Boulevard in the city of Boston. We scheduled this information session with you because we know this project is unique and has many facets and crosses disciplines. So we welcome this opportunity to share more information about the project as you decide whether or not your organization or you might submit a proposal. Today, we'll outline the background and principles of the project as we currently see them. We'll also do our best to field any questions you have, though we know that we anticipate much of this work will be created and developed in collaborations with the successful applicant or applicants. At this time, unless there are any questions, I can turn it over to Brendan, who will share more about the project. Brendan?
Great, thanks so much, Sarah. Thank you all for being here today. I'm very excited to see a good group here. I'll outline a little bit about the project, but first I just want to introduce myself. So my name is Brendan Little. I'm a consultant working with the RISE Foundation currently. Prior to this, I was the policy director for the Mayor's Office of Recovery Services at the City of Boston for 5 years, which is an office I helped create out of the Mayor's office in 2014, 2015. And I'm also a person with lived experience both with substance use and homelessness, and was born and raised in the City of Boston. So this project is near and dear to my heart, both professionally and personally. And it really stems from a problem, which is a problem of a breakdown of communication in the Mass and Cass neighborhood. There are many groups in the Mass and Cass neighborhood. But over the last few years, the area has had an increase of services, especially what we call low threshold services for drug users and for individuals experiencing homelessness. And that has had kind of a ripple effect across the community. So it's been kind of a chicken egg situation where, we noticed a lot more people on the street in 2016, and then worked with the other city departments to create an engagement center. It's a drop-in space for people to be and have some sort of dignity and space. And then that kind of drew more people. So just increasingly, there's been several different factors which have complicated the area, which is, the highest amount of overdose deaths nationally ever recorded this past year. Overwhelmingly amount due to fentanyl, which is one of the primary substances used by people in the area. COVID, of course, increasing economic inequality. So it's really, what we're seeing at the area Mass and Cass is being seen in many cities across the country. Really just tent communities springing up, people who don't have a lot of options, who have a great deal of trauma that are trying to survive. And having worked in the neighborhood for many years, and I worked at 774 Albany Street. Sorry, there's a sound going by. Having worked at 774 Albany Street, which is where the city's needle exchange, harm reduction program, and access to care programs were, I was very familiar with the area. I was there every day, and I wasn't at City Hall, away from the problem. So I got really to see the area change over the years. And we also fielded constituent concerns that ranged from business owners to homeowners and renters. And increasingly, at the early stages of us founding the office, there was communication. I think that there were a lot of public meetings and well-meaning people, even if they had different ideas about how to approach the increasing issues in the neighborhood. But over the years, with increasing amounts of death, with increasing amount of blight in the area, trash, debris, businesses having people outside or overdosing outside, it just became a lot more complicated. And so this is a issue that is very big and has a lot of components, but that's kind of the outline of the problem as we see it. If you could go to the next slide, Sarah, I'd appreciate it. So from that kind of discord and great amounts of trauma in the neighborhood, we started to think about a community reconciliation, conflict reconciliation project that aims at bringing different stakeholders together. And this would really be fueled by voices that have been historically underrepresented, because the area has had a lot of coverage, a lot of media coverage, a lot of people are talking about the area, but much of that coverage is stigmatized or told from a certain perspective. And it's our belief, having worked in the area and knowing the population, that there's many voices who have not been heard in the mass and cast narrative. And that affects how people see the area, that affects how the area is funded or not funded or supported. And so what we are kicking around here at RISE is thinking about a process that brings in trauma-informed experts, people who have a background in bringing people together, people who have a wide array of knowledge ranging from substance use or homelessness. And they don't need to have a substance use background per se, but I think having a knowledge of some of the complex issues facing the area. And speaking about historically underrepresented voices, one of the things that's really key is that this is all taking place in the wreckage of the failed war on drugs. So many of the Black and Brown communities in Lower Roxbury are one of the key stakeholders in the neighborhood who have concerns about the services or feel like the discrepancy of Black and Brown people disproportionately being locked up for low-level drug crimes in the 80s and early 90s, and still currently, compared with the more lenient, softer approach to people who use opioids, primarily white, though that is changing. So there's a lot going on in the neighborhood. This is a project that encapsulates gentrification, race relations, the wreckage of failed drug policies. And while those are very big, messy issues, I think that at the heart of it, it's about a neighborhood, and it's about community stakeholders in one neighborhood that need to get together to learn to work through their trauma together, and realizing that it might not be appropriate for every stakeholder to get together, but thinking about ways to really foster understanding, compassion, and helping the neighborhood begin to heal from some of the immense trauma that the neighborhood has faced on various levels over the last few years. I think there's been some really promising progress from the Wu administration in the last few months about housing people into low threshold housing, breaking down the tent communities, though I think some people might argue that there's some trauma there as well. It's a very complicated, messy issue, but we're really looking for somebody who can think about these issues and begin to strategize ways to bring people together. Having said that, we also know this is a very big project and that everybody might not be perfect for every component of this process. So we're really encouraging people to apply, and even if they're think that they can really just be a strategic thinker as part of this, or one piece that I forgot to mention is there's a public art component to this, because storytelling and reconciliation and bringing people together, a big piece of that is we thought that public art is a very important medium to be able to do that. So you may be really good on the public art piece of it, or the strategic thinking about having thought through some of these processes, or you may have a larger organization that can facilitate some of the legwork of bringing people together or thinking that through. So we're cognizant that it's a complicated process and it's a complicated issue. And as far as we know, there's not really anything else out there like it. So we're excited about it, but that also poses challenges, because I think people have questions about it, or are trying to wrap their head around it. So that's the key piece. And then the final piece is we don't want this to just be another convening, because there's been many, many convenings and many, many meetings in the Massancast neighborhood over the years. And through Rise is really committed to making sure that any gains made in this process are sustained, with financially and just with buy-in, to make sure that whatever comes from this process, be it some sort of entity that continues to foster connection, continues to tackle some of these thorny issues, is sustained and kept up. That's something that is really important to me and Sarah and the whole team here at Rise, thinking about not just having another one and done, because there's been a lot of that, and frankly that can cause more harm than good. So yeah, so that's the gist of it. Sarah, I don't know if you want to add anything that I've missed, or you just want to add anything else.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, Brendan, and thank you so much for such a beautiful overview of this. I think the thing I would add is we're really looking for a design partner in a lot of ways. So that's why this is an RFI. We're really interested in ideas. And so we imagine that the successful candidate for this would really be building this with us. And so we're certainly happy to take questions this afternoon and answer them to the best of our ability. But please keep in mind that we are going to be building this with the selected partner. And so some of it remains to be seen, if that makes sense. So maybe I'll stop sharing my screen so that if anybody has questions or wants to make a comment, they can be better seen.
I have a question. I don't know whether you prefer them in the chat or by voice.
By voice is great.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Of course, it's a small town, so we know a lot of our friends are here. And hello, everybody. Great to see you all. My question is really, is there a city or municipality or any place in general that has an example of something that you would find to be a model, either the design process itself or the outcome?
When it comes to this issue, not that I'm aware of. I know there's some conflict resolution people on here who are much smarter than me, but I think there's been some great community processes done in the past, but none that I'm aware of that are at the intersection of homelessness, gentrification, substance use, the increasing amount of people on the street, which is something we're seeing in every city in the country, increasingly. So there's nothing that I know of currently.
Thanks. I didn't know of anything either. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of exciting. I think that's an opportunity for this, because, when we've talked about this with various people, I think that they've thought, oh, my community needs that. And I think that, even in doing this process, there'll be many missteps or mistakes or wrong turns along the way, that is all very useful in helping other communities think through how they might address this. And maybe it's not around substance use or homelessness for them, maybe it's another issue that's kind of correlates. But I think that there's a huge need out there. And I think that the time feels appropriate in the city of Boston, because I feel like the area still has many challenges, but it's off the front page news for now, with the tents and everything kind of being the forefront of everything going on. There's an elected mayor that's in power, where the city's had 3 mayors in the past year. So I think that it's a really good time to begin to dive into some of this work and hopefully foster some healing in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, as you were talking about in other spaces, the two things that came to my mind were, generally speaking, not so successful and also not as creative and multi-sector. But I think about efforts to bring police and young people who are involved in the criminal legal system together to sort of, redefine their interactions on and off the streets. And then school closings, efforts for municipalities to sort of engage communities in creative ways to manage the challenges of those impacts on communities. I think both of those kinds of efforts may have some lessons about what not to do more than what to model.
Definitely.
I have a question. Hi, everyone. I'm Kathleen McCabe with Health Resources in Action. Nice to see you all. I guess my question, and thanks for the overview, it was really helpful to hear your vision, Brendan and Sarah. I guess just given we know we know how complex this is and what a sort of a major undertaking it is. I guess I'd love to hear a little bit about like what your vision for this year is. Is it really on the design of the process, or is it the design and implementation and just sort of the scale? Just especially just to be totally transparent in light of the budget that you put that was in the RFI. I guess it'd be helpful to sort of hear from your perspective, like what you think might happen in the first year of this.
Sarah, do you want to take that at first?
Yeah, and in some ways we'll look to all of you to tell us what that looks like. But I think what we really imagine, Kathleen, and thanks for bringing this up, is designing it as quickly as possible so that we can get some phases or some tiers moving forward as quickly as we can, while being cognizant that it is complex, that has to be done correctly and it has to be done thoughtfully. And so some combination of urgency and really strong coordination and thoughtfulness is going to be really key here. And I think it's our desire within the year to have activities happening for sure. We definitely aren't interested in a year of design. I think speaking for me, that's not something that I think we had envisioned. I think we do want to get started, and whether that looks like starting with some kind of tiered process or phases, or having a design group to help within the community to kind of get one sort of foot in the door going, that makes sense to us. But we're totally open to all of you who have done this kind of work, to the recommendations for how to move this forward. But I do think there again, there's this tension between strong urgency to move quickly while doing it carefully and thoughtfully.
I also just wanted to add to the budget portion of the question. This is something that RISE is committed to, as we said, not as just a one and done, but also there's been multiple other funders who are interested in funding something around mass and CAS, and could potentially come to the table. And there's been some interest in that. So that is something that I think this is just kind of the initial phases of it, but I do believe that there will be more resources as time goes on.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That's helpful to understand.
Other questions?
Just following along in that same route, we were looking at, what were the analogous processes of truth and reconciliation and other spaces. And one that I looked at was the process in Canada, their commission. And, that was 5 years, $72 million. That's 500 times basically bigger than this. I don't think the problem is 500 times smaller at Mass and CAS. So I wonder if you have some sense of what that size of investment might end up being. It's hard to, vision out a process if we don't have a sense of what that could be. I think, I could give you the Cadillac version and we may never get there. So I'm wondering what you see that investment or ballpark being when you get the folks in place. And then Brendan, what you talked about was not just the reconciliation process, but then something that deals with the issues that are brought up from it. So just wondering what that connection to it is. So if you have anything, I know that's a lot.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, Mo, and we were really interested in that example. And I think the 72 million includes a lot of, reparation payments and things of that nature that are amazing. And I do think 72 million is probably not where we're headed, to be frank with you. But I do see this as something that will grow. And I think Brendan's point around interest in other community members joining us, I think there's a really significant desire for that to be the case. Could I tell you the exact budget of how that will go and in how many years it'll go out? I wish I knew that today. I don't. I think what we grow here is really going to be the seed that really shapes what that future looks like. And so I know it's not the best answer, but I do know there's strong interest. I do know that as we build something really strong in this first phase, we will draw interest not only during the year, but for years afterward.
That's actually great, because just that vision for it being more than this is, I think, exactly what we were wondering about. So thank you.
And to that point, Mo, I think if we get there and decide that it isn't working and we took a risk and did this, we're not going to build something just because we can. So I do think there's a sort of see how it goes approach too here.
Yeah, and I think then to your other question about, the kind of deliverable or, making some sort of change after the fact, after the process, I think it really just aims to, whatever we find is the kind of the best means of bringing people together and fostering communication and healing, finding a way to sustain that. Because that's the biggest thing. And I don't, again, it can be tricky because we don't know what this looks like. We're not conflict resolution experts, but I do know the area very well, and I do know the problems very well. And I have seen a steady decline in people being able to connect and work together, in 2015, 2016, and then just the heaps of trauma, much of which I experienced as well with my colleagues and people that I've worked with, where there's just a breakdown in communication. There's a distrust of, different groups distrust one another. Success looks like 50 different things to 50 different people. So it's a complex problem, but I do believe that, there are, just from my kind of cursory research and speaking with some of the people on this call, that there is a potential for having some sort of healing and improving the area a little bit. We're not going to solve every problem in the area by any means, but I do believe that we could have something that could and really foster communication and get people together. And I also think that RISE's role as a third-party convener, speaking as somebody who was a city employee for several years, is really crucial, because the city's done a lot of stuff, the state's done a lot of stuff, but I think having a third-party convener that can breathe a little bit freer and doesn't need to politically have every right or wrong person on the be a part of the process, I think is really crucial. So yeah, so that's my 2 cents on that.
Other questions?
So I'll ask one more if no one else is jumping in, but I do talk for a living, so please,
Go for it.
The geography of the problem isn't mass and Cass. How do you reconcile that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that I was in a meeting earlier today, and somebody asked me, what is, how do you define mass and Cass? And even when I was at the city, we were hours and hours and hours, weeks and weeks of meetings about how far to go out and how to define it. And that's why I think that it's so important to lean into the principle of this project, which is bringing various, yes, it's not confined to this area, but every area has these components in a major city, in Boston, where there's the, homeowners or renters, people on the street, disenfranchised communities, usually Black, brown, and poor, and businesses that are facing some issue. So I think that while the area, substance use and homelessness are not confined to that one area of the city, I think that you can extrapolate out by that kind of being the epicenter of it, and historically being the case. And I think that that's one component I think is really important, is that a lot of people that I've spoken to is like, it's never been this bad, which is, it's very bad and it can be really complicated, but being born and raised here and reading about Boston history, at the turn of the 20th century, Tremont Street was single room occupancies for, elderly alcoholics. The neighborhood has this really interesting history of serving some of the city's most vulnerable, especially substance users. So I know it's kind of a big answer, but I think that, while you're right, it's not just confined to that. There's issues all over the city. I think that by starting there, we could learn some lessons and have some, get some really valuable information that could then address some of the other communities in the city.
And Brendan, just thank you for that. One of the things that came up for me is I literally was in a conversation with police and service folks in Cambridge who were talking about literally mass and Cass having a impact on what they see in Central Square. And when folks were there, they weren't in Central Square, and now they're in Central Square, not just the Cambridge people, which is always like a, you know, like if these are our residents, then let's treat them as such, not what we do, but that's a whole other thing. But they, you know, they have this interaction with Mass and Cass as populations go back and forth and people go back and forth. And so I think that's more of what I mean, is that it's broader than, you know, Boston. It's folks from lots of places, wherever their, you know, origination spaces. But what I'm hearing is you're looking for a more place-based strategy around Mass and Cass. Is that fair?
Yes, but I think that if we do it right, in my mind, the universality of the struggles will become apparent. And I think that you know, so much of the narrative of Mass and Cass is being told by, you know, tent communities, blight, crime, you know, all the kind of negative stuff and stigmatizing stuff, and that stuff exists there. But humanity exists there, community exists there, hope exists there, incredible amount of sacrifice and kindness exists there. So I think that, you know, telling those stories, I think, you know, finding a mechanism to make sure that everybody's heard, which hasn't, I think, been the case previously, that hopefully that can make that person who's looking, you know, saying, oh, all these people are coming from Mass and Cass to, you know, Eggleston Square to, you know, they've been displaced or in the common now, or wherever, you know, that they can think a little bit more about this because they've heard stories from people and they understand the roots of it a little bit more. I do think that's possible, because I think that if you think about all the tendrils that the stigmatizing media coverage has, you know, stigmatizing social media posts, Channel 5 News, the Boston Globe, whatever, Boston Herald, you know, just kind of anecdotes. I think that if we can compete with that in a compelling way that tells people's stories, that tells the neighborhood story, that could really make a dent in how the neighborhood is perceived and stigmatized. And again, that can have ripple effects out to just people generally who are facing any kind of struggle. But Mass and Cass gets it all the time. You know, it's like these people aren't from here, you know, because a lot of them aren't. They're from surrounding communities that don't have low threshold services. There's a lot of that. Let's get these people out of here, you know. But I think wherever you go, be it in Cambridge or Mass and Cass, I think it's really important to just lean into the problem as opposed to just, you know, shy away from it or dismiss it. I appreciate that question. I think it's really smart.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Great. Well, we thank you all so much for your interest in this project. We know it's very different than other projects than at least RISE has done, but then that others have done across the country. There's similar pieces, but nothing the same here. So we wanted to really bring a group together. Normally, you don't often see faces of competitors, if you will, together in a room like this. And we wanted to do this because there is an opportunity for us to all think about this as our project. And whether it's formally going in together in a bid for this, or just thinking of this as something we're all working towards. And so I wanted to sort of foster that opportunity for collaboration should there be some interest there. And so if you heard from someone that you really want their contact information, I can try to put you all together. But in the meantime, thank you all very much. We will be posting this session as well as some frequently asked questions that have come up, which actually were all covered here today on our website, and we'll send you all the link. And if you need to be in touch, I think you all have my email address. We'll look forward to hearing from you by the deadline.
Yeah. And also feel free, if you think of somebody else that is not on our radar, that hasn't heard about this, or you think that somebody might be good for this or a component of this, feel free to share it with them.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Have a great day. Bye.
Bye, thanks.